Okay, as Lynn knows, we have a number of questions on Professor Galbraith's paper. The bulk of those questions, I think have been answered in the course of Mr. LaRouche's presentation. But there is one general area that remains. One of the task forces asks, Mr. LaRouche, one of the points that Professor Galbraith has made is that when considering what did and did not work during FDR's presidency, that there has to be a differentiation between the question of state credit and consumer credit. In the area of state credit, we assume that what we're discussing is state credit properly directed toward projects that are vital to the nation's economy, like infrastructure rebuilding, but really anything that is involved in fostering real economic growth. The fact is that work is done, people are reemployed, things are built, people are paid, people spend money, and the economy grows. But this, at least from the standpoint of what we're discussing, is not the same as consumer credit. Professor Galbraith's point is that it is true that consumer credit was not restored until well after the war. But what he argues is that this fact, while true, is irrelevant, because long before consumer credit was restored, the economy itself was on the road to recovery. People may not have had credit, but they had money. Today, there seems to be little differentiation between the two. Even worse, the prevailing view seems to be that the only way to foster economic growth is to rapidly restore the availability of consumer credit rather than the other way around. It seems to us that the failure to make this differentiation represents a fatal disorientation in the way that policy is judged. Are we looking at this the right way? And is your assessment of this regarding FDR's success and direction accurate?
First of all, it's accurate. But I think you have to put something else on this, because you have to think about the objections you run into if you adopt a policy. No, the policy is correct, but with the objections you'll get by announcing the policy required you to say a little bit more. You have to get rough. You say the right thing, but you have to enforce it. Now, the intent of our nation is not a matter of distributing willpower to a lot of individual people. The intent of the nation is something where we harbor our resources in such a way that we don't dissipate them chaotically. That's the basic thing of a recovery. And the idea of consumer credit, let the individual decide where to invest, that's wrong. That's stupid. The way it worked in recovery, in every recovery, is the government recognized that certain undertakings were available and necessary. The government therefore said the government is providing credit and funds for these purposes. Now, whoever is going to serve that and apply to be one of the persons who does that job, show up. So now you have credit given, but not to somebody who comes in. Can I have some of this? Can I have this candy, that candy, this kind of candy? No, that's not the way you do it. What you do is you determine on the level of the federal government what is the national purpose. To that end, you consult with the state political organizations, and you have plenty of people who are willing to tell you what you should do as government. So you have on your table all these options. You have to decide what the national interest is. What is the interest of the federal government as the representative of the people of the nation as a whole, or the future of the nation? You vote on your policy. You select your policymakers. You make a decision as to what the policy will be. You say, well, if you want credit, come in on one of these things and qualify for it. And that's the way it's done. Don't sit out there and say, well, we got some money we can lend, we want to help private industry. Bunk. Forget it. Get away from that. Money has no intrinsic value. The idea that money has intrinsic value is as old as the cult of Delphi, which used to engage in the use of this kind of swindle. It's the way Europe was run by Venetian swindlers, by the Roman Empire, by the Byzantine Empire, and similar kinds of people, by the British Empire. Organized around chaos. See, the secret of empire is to play one person against the other, especially religion or culture. What is the order on the suggestion to Lord Shelburne in organizing the British Empire? Use the precedent of Julian the Apostate. Take and divide every religion against every religion. Divide every culture against every culture. Create a pantheon of religions and cultures and orchestrate their conflicts with each other, the way they run the Israeli-Arab conflict in the Middle East under Sykes-Picot. The Israelis don't start the wars. The Arabs don't start the wars. The British organize the wars, like a boxing event or a football match. They organize it. So the point is, you operate on the basis of a national interest and a national selection of the policies of the nation, or the group of nations which agree on a common policy. You then mobilize the credit you have, which is always scarce. You don't exclude things, you just don't fund them. And you put out bids and say, who among us, or who, if we have to go to foreign sources, is willing to contribute and dedicate themselves competently to implementation of this goal? And that's the way you do it. That's the way Roosevelt did it. We used the war case for mobilizing industry, and we had intended in the post-war period not to shelve it and downsize the U.S. economy. Our intention was to go overseas, provide more credit to give to the benefit of countries which are colonized, to free themselves, to assist Europe in recovering, that sort of thing. That was our national mission. That's what we intended to do. Truman cut it back. Truman recolonized the world for the sake of the British and the Dutch. He had the wrong policy. He was a stinker. And he was a pro-fascist in a certain sense, like a lot of other people. So no, you take a national mission which gets a national result, and you have to take responsibility as government for getting that result. And you will do adjustments all the way through to make sure it works. And you call people in and say, there's your opportunity. We gave contracts to people, war contracts for military goods and other goods, to firms. And they had to perform on the contract. And we gave them credit to do the job. Gave them through the banking system or direct loans by government. And that's the way you have to do it now. You have a shortage of resources. You have to go to the operations which will give you the greatest benefit with the least effort. You set up a table of decisions to go with this thing, and you go with it, and you fund it. And you create the credit by government, by state credit, not by money, by state credit, to make these projects work. And you look for the result. You mobilize, you educate, you have propaganda machines, you have teams going out to make sure these projects are going to work. You fix up projects that aren't working that should work, the way we did in World War II and other conditions. That's the way to do it. Go back to the history of how the United States organized before World War II and for that. Look at the history of the United States under Lincoln and what followed after Lincoln. You get the idea how it works.